All right. Not hearing anything. Of course, that doesn't mean I didn't flip it the wrong way. Let me see if I got a light. Yeah, I got a green light. Ah, there it comes. All righty. I think it's working. Yay. Alrighty. Hopefully I've got the link sent to everybody that needs it. And we're ready to go. We are in Daniel chapter 6. Actually, I said last week we were going to start in chapter 5, verse 31, which actually should belong to chapter 6, verse 1. And so we're going to treat it that way. So let me ditch this thing for right now. Probably hear me a little bit better, maybe. We will see. And we're going to work our way through this chapter kind of as a discussion as we go. So the very first thing that I asked was, who was the leader of the Medo-Persian Empire in Babylon? Darius the Mede, according to verse 31 of chapter 5, received the kingdom at the age of 62. But then the big question is, who is Darius the Mede? Because if you look at the very back of the handout that I gave you a list of the folks that are historically the leaders of these kingdoms or these empires, starting with the Babylonian and then going to the Medo-Persian, then to Greece, and then to Rome. And you'll notice there's not a Darius the Mede there. Now, there are several Dariuses in the Medo-Persian list, but they occur later in time, not right now. So this last sentence here of chapter 5 has caused a lot of turmoil. And a lot of people say, well, this Daniel guy or whoever wrote this book obviously didn't know what he was talking about. So this cannot be Holy Spirit guided. It cannot be part of the canon. It obviously is some kind of rogue history that was written after the fact, and he tried to go back and explain what was going on. Well, I treat that like I told you some time back about Belshazzar. Belshazzar didn't exist. Obviously, Daniel was wrong. Didn't exist. Until the 1800s, 1880s, they uncovered Nabonidus's cylinder. And on that, he actually describes the fact that Belshazzar was his co-regent. It was like, aha, Bible's right again. People are wrong again. Daniel was proved to be correct. Similar to what I told you about the Hittites. The Hittites, there was a big knock about the Bible, about the Hittites, because way back there in Genesis, Abraham bought a field from Ephron the Hittite. Well, the Hittites didn't exist. Obviously, the Bible's wrong. Couldn't exist. Until 1970, when guess what? In and around Ankara, Turkey, they discovered the Hittite civilization. And now there is a beautiful, massive museum in Ankara, Turkey that my family and I got to visit courtesy of the United States Air Force when they said, "Thou shalt go to Ankara, Turkey." And I thought, okay, I guess that's better in some places they could send us. But there it is, proof. But it took till 1970. Now, how long is it going to take until we find out who this Darius the Mede is? I don't know. A lot of people have some suspicion as to who it might be. Some say that it was maybe a title that Darius or King Cyrus took on himself. That was kind of like a title of Pharaoh or Herod or something like that. So whoever he was, he just took on that title, and perhaps he did. We don't really know. The very last verse in this chapter, in some translations, tends to lend some credence to the fact that it might be Cyrus. The number one, let me give you I guess probably what the biggest ideas are that Darius the Mede could be. Like I say, the first one is that they think Daniel's a nut job and this book is wrong and all that. So I'm throwing that one out because Belshazzar, the Hittites, and other things that have come along to prove the Bible right so many times, it'll be proved right one of these days, even if it's in the end. We'll find out. Some say that this was Gubaru, and I don't know if that's how you pronounce the man's name or not, but he was one of the generals that conquered the city of Babylon. And he was, at least according to Cyrus's history, set up there as a governor. And according to that history, he actually divided things up into regions and assigned people over them, which sounds very much like what you get out of Darius the Mede. He divides up areas, puts satraps over them, and then administrators or governors on top of that. So there are a lot of folks leaning toward this general being the Darius and having taken on Darius as a title. Some also say that Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian are the same person. Cyrus's father was Persian. His mother was the daughter of Astyages, I think that is, the last ruler of the Medes. So he was both Persian and Mede. When the two names appear in 628, which is a verse that I said we'll get to at the tail end, but you can look there right now if you want. But depending on the translation that you have, it may say that Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Other translations read, so this Darius enjoyed success in the reign of Darius, that is the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So depending on the translation you have, it may lend credence to the fact that it could be the same person. And if they were the same person, then Daniel may be trying to show the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy. In Jeremiah 51:11, Jeremiah says there, sharpen the arrows, take up the shields. The Lord has stirred up the king of the Medes, because his purpose to destroy Babylon. The Lord will take vengeance for his temple. And then further down, 51:28, prepare the nations for battle against her, the king of the Medes, their governors, all their officials, all the countries they rule. So, the bottom line is we don't know. And I certainly don't know. Neil Pryor, Dr. Neil Pryor, who was a professor of Bible at Harding University. He was also the dean of the School of Bible at Harding University, and he was an elder of the Church Street congregation where our daughters attended when they were at Harding, a man that I've met and admire, and I think he's probably got more Bible smarts than I did. He actually did a research paper on who is Darius the Mede, and his conclusion is, we don't know. So that's where we'll leave it. We don't know. What he does say, and what they do suggest, is that we should never conclude that such a person never existed. We should not also conclude that Daniel is therefore unreliable, and we should not conclude that the author is ignorant of contemporary history, because the Bible continues to prove itself over and over and over again, and it will, in this particular case, one of these days. We just don't know when. So, Babylon fell in 539 BC to Cyrus the Great. If you remember when we first started this study in Daniel chapter 1, Babylon came into being. And Daniel was one of the ones that was removed from Judea, or from Judah, likely of the tribe of Judah, perhaps of the royal line. We don't know that, but a lot of people suggest that maybe he was in David's line. But we don't know that for sure. But he did come from Judah. And we guessed him to be about 15 years of age. The training that they went through for the Persians, or rather for the Babylonians, was typically ages 14 to 17. Those 3 years, they went through that training to get to what he was supposed to be. So if we stick with his guesstimation of being 15 when he was taken captive in 605, and now this is 539, that means that he is 81 years of age at this point. You know, a lot of times we get the picture of Daniel going into the lion's den. We got a young man going into the lion's den. That's not the fact. The guy that goes in the lion's den is older than I am. About 81 years of age. Could be a little bit older, could have been a little bit less. So it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, and 3 administrators over them, of whom Daniel was one. These satraps were accountable to these men so that the king would not suffer loss. In other words, there's some spending going on for the government, and there's also taxes coming in to the government. So he's put people in charge of that. He's calling them satraps, and this is a word that appears in Ezra, in Esther, and also in Daniel. It tends to be a person that's governing an area, kind of like a lieutenant, and he's a subordinate ruler. And so the idea is he takes in taxes and he makes expenditures for the government, and somebody's watching over him. In this case, they're governors, 3 governors. Daniel is one of those 3. The king had to depend on his officers to see that the work was done, because he could not be everywhere all the time. So he had to put in place men that he could trust. And Darius was one of these guys who was not ignorant about the way of the world. But the wise man, Solomon, has this to say in Ecclesiastes 5, 8, and 9. If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them are others higher still. The increase of the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. In other words, the little farmer out there is supplying it all for everybody, because everybody up the chain is taking some of it off. Even the king is profiting from what's happening to the lowest man out there. So Daniel distinguishes himself. We don't know exactly how he does that, but it says that he has exceptional qualities. And the king, recognizing his faithfulness, his truthfulness, his honesty, and these qualities, and probably the fact that God too impressed on Darius, this man Daniel, he distinguishes himself above the other administrators. And it could be that he heard some of the recent history, because it was just last week that we were talking, when the night that Babylon was overrun, they were having a party, and Belshazzar was talking to Daniel about his abilities, and the queen had talked to him previously about Daniel's abilities. She says, there is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. At the time of your father, he was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like that of the gods. And Belshazzar, slightly different, says, I heard, talking to Daniel himself, that the spirit of gods is in you, that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. So the wise leader gathers information, and Darius soon learns that Daniel has a reputation for honesty and for wisdom. King James says he has an excellent spirit. New American Standard says he has an extraordinary spirit. So you ever thought about what we need to do to kind of differentiate ourselves in the workplace so that we are recognized as having an outstanding spirit or an extraordinary spirit? Well, I think part of it is we don't act like everybody else in the workplace. We're different. We're called to be different. So the coarse talking and the jokes and all that kind of stuff, that's out. Instead, we show ourselves to be trustworthy, faithful, honest, acting with integrity. We're not corrupt. We're not negligent of our duties. 1 Thessalonians 4:1, Paul would tell the Thessalonian brethren, finally then, brothers, we instruct you how to live in order to please God, as in fact you are living, and now we ask you and we urge you in the Lord Jesus, do this more and more. So you're doing the right things, but keep on doing it. Keep on doing the right things. That's what you need to do. And Paul in Colossians tells the Colossian brethren in 3:23 and 24, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an award, an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So we need to make sure that we're working with all of our heart. We're working like we're working for the Lord, because we are. And we will stand down. So the other guys get the idea, well, they hear, maybe Darius has even announced, he's thinking about putting Daniel over the top of everybody. So they try to find some reason to find a charge against Darius. We need to find something on him, because if we can do him in and do away with this thing. But they could find no corruption, because he was trustworthy or faithful, depending on your translation. Nor was there corruption, nor was there negligence. So they hear about this plan to promote Daniel. They try to find something about his work, but nothing could be found. They oppose him for several reasons. One is just plain envy. Two is probably financial. My guess is they had figured out a way that they could get a bigger cut than what they should have gotten for their salary, and probably have others down the line that are cooperating with them, and they're probably taking their extra cut along the way too. So there's envy of Daniel getting a higher position and a raise and all that kind of stuff. There's probably also a little bit of jealousy that they're going to cut out the money that they might get. They probably also resent him because he's an older man and he's telling these younger guys what to do. Maybe he ought to retire and just go away and leave them alone. And he's a Jew. And he's in exile. So there's all kinds of reasons that they don't like Daniel and don't plan to serve him. So what can we do? Well, in verse 5 they say, well, we're never going to find any basis of charges against this guy unless we can find something to do with the law of his God. If we can pit something against God against him, then we stand a chance of getting him. But we're not going to find it in his regular day-to-day work because he does the right thing. Wouldn't it be commendable? Wouldn't it really be commendable for us if people have character so impeccable that they cannot accuse us of any wrongdoing? Wouldn't that be great? If we're going to go after him, we're going to have to trap him in something to do with his God, because man, he's impeccable. He does the work he's supposed to do. He's honest. He's forthright. He's got integrity. So they go after his religious practices. If we can make them illegal, he's as good as in the lion's den. What's jealousy and envy got to do with it? Well, I think absolutely everything. And I mentioned it before. Jewish, exile, elderly, favored by the king. Do all you can to be an upright person. You don't need to be a snob, you know. But no matter what we do and no matter how we act, there's somebody out there that's not going to like us. And there's somebody out there that's going to seek to do us in. And you know what Jesus said we do with them? You love them. Yeah, I know, it's bizarre logic, but that's what he says. Jesus says that you love your enemies. You do good to those who despitefully use you. Matthew 5:44. We are to be different. We are called to be different. And it's in everything that we do. So, these guys come up with an injunction, and they take it to Darius, and they say, all of us have gotten together. Now, you know that's a lie right off the bat, because Daniel probably was not involved in this, nor probably a lot of the others. But all of us have gotten together, and we've all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce this decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, should be thrown in the lion's den. Now, O king, issue this decree, put it in writing so it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So Darius puts the decree in writing. If they had a quorum, then that means they could get 61 of these guys together, and they got a quorum. If you get 50%, like 31, just a little over 50% of that, then you've got a vote. All right, you have now got 25% of these guys that have pushed through this edict, and it may have been less than that. Who knows? Maybe these two other administrators and the few guys that they knew were on their side kind of got together and worked this thing up, and they go before Darius and they tell a bigger lie than what they may have. But they lied. All of us didn't do this. Some of us did. Maybe very few of us did. But they sell Darius on the idea that this will unify the kingdom. Everybody will come to you, whether they're coming to you as a god or they're coming to you as a priest. See, he says they're not to go to any other god, they're not to go to any other man. So Darius would act as the god, or Darius would act as the priest for the next 30 days. His thinking, I guess, is that this is going to help unify the kingdom. Then everybody can go back to worshiping all their other gods, and it's not going to be a big deal. Punishment was the lion's den. Whoever was guilty in disobeying would be thrown into the lion's den where people would be torn to pieces. The Babylonians burned individuals. You know, we studied that before in chapter 3, verse 6 and 20. But the Persians worshipped fire, so they threw people into the lion's den. The Assyrians and the Persians captured lions and put them in cages so that they would be available for this purpose of eating up people that broke their law or for hunting. And that's probably what happened to most of the lions in that region, because for the last century or so, there haven't been any lions in that territory. They've probably been hunted into extinction. We have a way of doing that. They also did not feed these lions very well. They fed them enough, but they didn't feed them well because they wanted them to be hungry. Anytime they threw somebody in there, they wanted that person to die a horrible but reasonably quick death. From what I understand, the lions that they had in these areas were a little bit smaller than the sub-Saharan lions that you see in Africa, but they were very ferocious. And 1 Samuel 17:37, David boasted about God delivering him from the paw of the lion. Both Samson in Judges 14:6 and Benaniah in 2 Samuel 23:20 both killed lions. Their power and their ferocity stood as symbols in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, you know, the devil is portrayed as a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour, 1 Peter 5:8. And Jesus is portrayed as the lion of the tribe of Judah in Revelation 5:5. He is the one that can open the book with the 7 seals. So, what does Daniel do when he knows that the edict has been passed that you're not going to pray to or you're not going to submit to any other god or any other man for the next 30 days? He goes right back to what he normally does. He goes back to his house, to the roof, to the little room that he's got up there, which says, by the way, that he's probably well off. Most people had a flat roof. You had to have a little extra money in order to have a room on top of your house. He not only has a shelter up there, he has a room up there that has windows. And he opens the window facing Jerusalem. And he prays on his knees facing Jerusalem 3 times a day. The psalmist in Psalm 55:16 and 17, "But I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry in distress, and he hears my voice." That's probably what Daniel did. Morning, evening, morning, and noon. And it's characteristic of his prayer, it says here, to thank God. So his prayers were primarily of thanks, although we'll find other prayers of his later too. But it's interesting too, in 1 Kings chapter 8, 44 through 54, Solomon, when he is dedicating the temple, has a lengthy prayer, and we're certainly not going to read it all. But in that prayer, he says, in verse 44, "When your people go to war against the enemies, wherever you send them, and when they pray to you, Lord, toward the city that you have chosen," that would be Jerusalem, "and the temple that I have built for your name," the temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. So wherever they go, they're at battle, what do? They kneel and they face Jerusalem toward the temple. They pray to God. He hears them and he honors their request. He goes on to say, "And when we sin against you and we're carried off into captivity," no matter where we are in the world in this captivity, and we realize our sin and we turn to Jerusalem, to the king, to the temple that I have built for you in the city that you have chosen, you will hear and respond. The captives, when they pray to you toward the land you gave your fathers, toward the city you have chosen, toward the temple I have built for you, for your name, you are to hear their plea and uphold their cause. And what was Daniel doing? Just exactly what Solomon had said. He was in captivity, he'd been carted off to Babylon, and he had a window that opened in the direction of Jerusalem where the temple was, and he was praying toward the temple. But the temple's already been demolished by this point. So now he's just praying toward the land that God had given them, toward the city that God had chosen, to where the temple used to be, and where the temple will one day be again. Jonah, inside the belly of the fish, Jonah prayed in Jonah 2:4. So I said, I have been expelled from your sight. Nevertheless, I will look again toward your holy temple. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? You're inside a fish. How do you figure out which way is the temple from in here? I don't know, but he said he would turn toward the temple. Psalm 5, 7, and 8. But I, by your great mercy, will come to your house. In reverence, I will bow down toward your holy temple. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness, because my enemies make straight your way before me. So, Daniel does exactly what he's continued to do since the very beginning. He honors God, and he turns toward God. So what do his enemies do? Well, they go by, it says, as a group, and they catch him praying 3 times a day. Now, I don't think there's 120 of these guys, plus the 2 administrators, standing around outside Daniel's house, observing him 3 times a day, praying. I think there's a smaller group, maybe 2, 3, 4, I don't know how many, but it says they go as a group. However many of them they are, they spy. Once they catch him praying 3 times a day, then they go running into the king, right? And they say to the king, hey, did you not make a decree that said for the next 30 days, anyone that did not pray to you instead of some other god or some other man was to be thrown in the lion's den? And the king answered and says, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians. It cannot be repealed. After confirming the injunction, then they say to the king in verse 13, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree that you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. 5 things. Daniel, the guy, the guilty party, an exile from Judah, he's a Jew. No attention to you, O king, doesn't listen to your decree, and he still prays in violation to your decree. It's similar to the accusation that was made of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah against Nebuchadnezzar in 3:12. O king, they have disregarded you, as far as bowing down to that image, and they end up in the fiery furnace. The king gets upset, greatly distressed. But he's not angry at them. He's not angry at Daniel. The king is angry with himself. He is greatly distressed because he has been led to making a decree that he never should have made. And so he spends the rest of the day trying to figure out how he can rescue Daniel and at the same time save his own face. And these guys, knowing exactly what's going on, wait till the day is almost over, and then they come to him. And again, they come as a group, verse 15. They approach the king. Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues shall be changed. 3 times in this chapter, that statement is made. The law of the Medes and Persians never changes. Verse 8, verse 12, verse 15. Twice in Esther 1:19 and Esther 8:8. So it was a done deal once the king had done it. And it predated the Medo-Persian Empire. It was the law of the Medes before. It was the law of the Persians before. So now it is the law of the Medes and Persians. The whole idea is, on the good side, that you couldn't stumble across the law. If the law was passed today, it couldn't be revoked the next day and you fall all over yourself because you didn't know that the king had just arbitrarily changed the law the next day. The other side is these guys were supposed to be next to gods, so they didn't make mistakes. They made it right the first time. And as long as the king was careful in what he did and what he signed, everything was great. But if he was not careful in what he did or what he signed, or if he had unscrupulous advisors, as is the case here, he signed something that he never should have, and bad things happen. Outside the scripture, the unchangeable nature of the Medo-Persian law is illustrated by a quotation of Diodorus regarding the attitude of Darius III. He will be one of those leaders later in the Medo-Persian Empire. After passing a death sentence on a man named Charidemus, Diodorus wrote, immediately he repented and blamed himself as having greatly erred, but it was not possible to undo what was done by royal authority. So he realized it. He knew he had condemned an innocent man, but that innocent man was going to die because he could not undo it. That's outside the Scripture. The Scripture clearly says that was the way they did it. If you remember in Esther, they actually put in a new law that said, okay, yeah, you can go fight against the Jews if you want to, but the Jews can fight back. Kind of changed things there. So Darius does what Darius has been trapped into doing. He orders Daniel into the lion's den. And he says to him, may your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. Now that's the New International Version that says that. And that sounds kind of like a prayer or maybe like a wish. The New American Standard says, your God, whom you constantly serve, himself will deliver you, which sounds more like an affirming case. We don't really know how far into the belief of Daniel's God Darius was, but he's somewhere in there. And depending on your translation, yours may sound more like a wish or a confirmation. But the night is spent in absolute misery. The king, as opposed to his normal way, does not go home to feast. Instead, he goes home to fast. He spends his night in meditation and in reflection and probably wondering how in the world he got trapped into something like this. He had no entertainment. Normally, he might have had music. He might have had laughter. He could have been entertaining, but none of that. Sleep fled from him. Perhaps he was tossing and turning over the plight that he had just brought upon himself and the fact that he was probably having an innocent man torn to shreds. No doubt he thought a lot about Daniel. So what's the king do first thing in the morning? Off to the lion's den. And he comes up to the lion's den and he calls out to Daniel in an anguished voice. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? That kind of lends credence to the fact that he thought there was some possibility that Daniel's God could and maybe would deliver him. Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and shut the mouth of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in God's sight. Nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, O king. See, from the very beginning, God recognized Daniel was innocent. And God also recognized that Daniel's service to God had absolutely nothing to do with his service to the king. He was a good servant to the king, just as he was a good servant to God. So in recognition of his innocence, God sent his angel. Angel shut the mouth of the lions. Not one of them posed a danger to the king's servant. He had been faithful servant to the Lord, and he was rewarded. It was by his faith that this prophet shut the mouth of lions, Hebrews 11:32 and 33. Psalm 34:7, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. So who was this angel? Well, we don't really know. One writer says, well, he's probably the same guy that's referred to as the angel of the Lord in Genesis 16:7 through 14, where Hagar meets an angel of the Lord. And she is reassured that things will be okay. Also, Abraham, when he is in the process of sacrificing Isaac, angel of the Lord shows up and says, don't do that. And in Exodus 3:2 and 4, when Moses encounters a burning bush, angel of the Lord speaks to Moses. In Judges 6:11 through 26, it's an angel of the Lord that comes to Gideon and says, hey, I need you to do some fighting. And Gideon says, well, let's do a little test. And in Judges 13 through 23, it's an angel of the Lord that comes to Manoah and tells him that he is going to have a son that will be a Nazirite. His son will be named Samson. And there's some things that he and his wife have to do in preparation for that. So we don't really know. I mean, there are two angels that are going to show up later here in Daniel that have names. Gabriel is going to show up in chapter 8 and chapter 9. Michael will show up in chapter 10 and chapter 12. Both of these are going to be in the New Testament as well. Gabriel appears to Zechariah in Luke 1:19 and also to Mary in Luke 1:26. Michael appears in Jude 9 where he argues with Satan about the body of Moses. And Michael also appears in Revelation 12:7 where he and his angel gang are throwing Satan and his angel gang out of heaven. No other angels are mentioned by name in the Bible that I know of. The king was overjoyed. He gave orders that Daniel should be taken out of the den. Daniel was lifted out of the den, and there was no wound found him, not a scratch on his body. Which is very similar, if you remember, when they brought out Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or better known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But like I said, we need to learn their real names, the proper God names, and not their heathen names. So it's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They had been in a fiery furnace, and there was nothing red about their skin. There was not a single hair singed. There wasn't a single smell of smoke on them. You can't get around a fire and not smell like smoke. These guys have been in the fire and didn't smell like smoke. When I burn trash, limbs, and that kind of stuff in the backyard, Peggy's like, "Wow, go to the laundry room, take your clothes off. You need to hit the shower. You smell like fire." These guys have been in the fire, not just throwing things on the fire, and keeping it going, that kind of thing. Yeah. Same with Daniel, not a scratch. At the king's command, all those who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and their children. Before they reached the floor of the den, the lions had overpowered them and crushed all their bones. If there was any doubt that the lions were not hungry, scratch that idea. These people did not even hit the ground before they were devoured. So Daniel was not saved by a bunch of full lions. It was an angel of the Lord that saved Daniel. The officials in that day and time often took the kids and the wives with them when they had some criminal. The idea being that if they left somebody alive, they may come back and seek revenge, so we'll just eliminate all possibilities that might exist. It was even true under the law of Moses. If you brought an accusation against somebody in order to get them executed for a crime, and it was proved that all of this was just a big figment of my imagination, then guess what? I would get the punishment that I was trying to entrap somebody else in. So fitting too that these guys got the punishment that they tried to give to Daniel. As a result of what had happened here, King Darius writes all the people, nations, and men of every language throughout the land. And his edict is so much better than what Nebuchadnezzar had done. Nebuchadnezzar had just simply said, "Don't say anything bad about the God of Daniel." But Darius, buddy, he goes overboard. "May you all prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel." Buddy, now that's better than you don't pray to anybody except me for 30 days. You must fear and you must reverence the God of Daniel. He is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. I don't think he wrote that on his own. I think he had help. I think this was an inspired individual that wrote this one. But he was impressed by Daniel. He was impressed by this honest man. He was impressed by what he went through. He was also impressed by the fact that God saved him against these lions. So what happened? Well, Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Or, depending on your version, it may say, so Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, that is, the reign of Cyrus the Persian. You can decide which way you want to read it the best, because we don't really know who this Darius is. Daniel continues at least to the third year of Cyrus. chapter 10, verse 1. So he will at least be in his mid-80s before he's done writing. Kingdoms and kingdoms come and go, but God's servant continues to live and to be used in a phenomenal way. And you know what? God will do the same with us. If we will submit to Him, if we will trust Him, if we will put ourselves in His hands, He will use us just like He used Daniel to affect His will in the area that we live. Thank you much for your attention today, and we're going to pick up with the next chapter next week.